Welcome back everyone to another Marvel Champions video, and this time we are taking a look at Star-Lord. So we've already covered Gamora. If you haven't checked out that video, it's on our channel, I'll link it up above. Feel free to go check it out to see a full rundown of all of Gamora's cards. But today we are talking about Star-Lord, which is a really cool new hero that has a lot of basically risk management is the best way to look at it. So we're gonna go over every single card. Let's jump right in. All right, starting things off, of course, with the alter ego, which is Peter Quill. Recovery of 3, hand size of 6, hit points of 10, standard. It's basically the exact same we saw in Gamora. Setup, search your deck and discard a pile for a copy of the Element Gun upgrade and add it to your hand to shuffle your deck. So there are 2 copies of Element Gun in the entire set of cards for Star-Lord, so you're going to basically be able to start the game with one of them in your hand, essentially hoping to be able to play one. It's a very cool card, we'll talk about it later, but basically that's one of his main weapon cards, and you'll draw the other one later in the game and eventually hopefully be able to dual wield both of them and have a bunch of functionality at your disposal. So really cool to let you start the game with one of them. It is a 3-cost card, which, is a little bit steep, and you might be thinking, will I even want to play it on the first turn if there's other things I want to do? We'll get to that in a second, because with the Star-Lord side of this card, it's going to make it a lot easier for you to play that. So that is the setup condition. There is also Smooth Talker, which is action, choose a card in your hand, swap that card with the top card of your deck. So this is very situational. It can be very good. There's situations that can arise that it will make it exceptionally good. In my experience so far in playing Star-Lord, it's never been something that's, a huge, factor in me wanting to play Star-Lord or a really cool condition. The odd time I'll draw into something that facilitates something on this turn specifically that I'd rather do now than having had waited till the next turn to be able to do. You're also delaying a card in your hand to the next turn. So if there's a card in your hand that you can't use right now, but you'd want to use next turn, rather than keep it in your hand, you can put it on the top of your deck and get a new card that you can potentially use this turn. It's not a huge thing, but it can come up into certain situations where all of a sudden it is just the exact thing you're looking for to help facilitate more, effective turns than you would have normally had. So overall, decent alter ego side, not overly exciting. We've seen much more exciting alter ego sides than I would say than Peter Quill. The biggest draw is just getting an Element Gun in your hand at the start of every game, because that is a really key card for Star-Lord, and something that if you can get out early, which in this case you always will, you'll be able to do a lot with it. So that's for Peter Quill. Let's jump into the hero form. Okay, so the Star-Lord hero is 2 thwart, 2 attack, 1 defense, pretty solid stats. Each ally you control gains the Guardian trait. So Star-Lord comes as a leadership deck, and he works really well with that because he essentially makes all his allies Guardians. So if you want to include a bunch of leadership allies from previous hero packs and earlier in the game, they can essentially become Guardians and work off that Guardian synergy, which is key in Star-Lord and makes him a very key player when it comes to leadership decks where you're wanting to build a Guardian team. You're probably going to be thinking about using Star-Lord as that hero. So pretty cool. And then he also has the ability, what could go wrong? Interrupt. When you play a card from your hand, deal yourself a face down encounter card, reduce the resource cost to play that card by 3, limit once per round. Insane ability. I used this almost every turn when I was playing with Star-Lord, unless I didn't have a card in my hand that cost 3 or more. If I did, I was almost always taking advantage of this. Yes, you get an encounter card, but Star-Lord, if you're playing Star-Lord, you better be ready to get encounter cards. That is his entire functionality is about getting dealt a bunch of encounter cards, but then doing overly powerful abilities, and this is a phenomenal example of that. Being able to play a 3-cost card for free once a round is insane. Being able to play 4 or 5-cost cards for 1 or 2 is equally as good. This facilitates so much. You can play your Element Gun on turn 1 for free. Element Gun is a phenomenal card. The encounter cards will sometimes hinder you. It will set you back. It will put more minions on the board. It'll mean that you'll have to have more you're dealing with. However, that being said, it is still really, really good. I would say totally worth it. If you're playing solo, and I found it to be a little bit more of a hindrance in solo because you don't have someone else to help you deal with the things that you're bringing out into the game by having all these encounter cards. When I was playing with Gamora and Star-Lord together, yes, I'd have a bunch of encounter cards, minions would be added in, but Gamora could help me deal with that and get things under control. When I'm playing Star-Lord by himself, all that falls to me. So I'm ramping more powerful cards into play quicker, but then I'm having to use them to deal with a bunch of the stuff that's happening because I brought them in, which sometimes ends up nullifying what you did. In other cases, it still leaves you set up with a way better situation than you had before, but I would say that the pros far outweigh the cons here. I love the ability. It's super strong and I use it all the time, and it makes Star-Lord an absolute blast to play as long as you're okay with the risk management that comes with his play style for having this ability. All right, the signature ally here is Nova Prime, which is a 5-cost ally, which might seem super expensive, but again, we're talking about Star-Lord here who can play this for essentially 2, so remember that. 2 thwart, 3 attack on 3 health. After you play Nova Prime from your hand, defeat a non-elite minion. So essentially just kill a non-elite minion. Nova Prime is very, very good. Ignore the 5 cost. I never yet have played Nova for its 5 cost. I don't think you will ever play Nova Prime for 5 cost. If you do, I think you're wasting the turn by doing that, unless you absolutely have nothing else to do with the 5 other cards in your hand. I think it's a complete waste. Playing it for 2, however, because of using Star-Lord's ability, is absolutely worth it. Yes, you get dealt an encounter card, but 2 costs for a 3 health, 3 attack, 2 thwart minion that kills something instantly when it comes into play is great value. Phenomenal card. I played this so many times. Anytime it was in my hand, I was basically triggering that ability to play it for 2 costs because it was just automatically worth it. If you look at it as a 2-cost ally, this would be one of the best 2-cost allies in the game. So if not the best 2-cost ally in the game, it would definitely almost would be. So very, very good card. Again, just never play it for 5. If you play it for 5, you're doing it wrong. Play it for 2 and you'll be happy. All right, next up we have 3 copies of Daring Escape. This is a 0-cost event. Deal yourself a face-down encounter card, ready your hero, and draw a card. So you get, again, an encounter card, but you're essentially cycling this for a better card from your deck, whichever card is on the top of your deck, and you're readying your hero. So for 0 cost, obviously phenomenal value. I don't even have to say that. The penalty is, of course, getting dealt the face down encounter card, but again, that is Star-Lord's entire MO, and there are some cards that are going to take advantage of having more encounter cards in front of you that you're going to want those encounter cards even when they bring a detriment with them. So Daring Escape is a phenomenal card, and you're going to see a lot of it because there's 3 copies. I almost always used it because it's always worth it to cycle it into something else. You're thinning your deck, you're getting a better card, and you're readying Star-Lord to be able to do more on your turn. I don't think you'll ever not use this card unless you are in a pinch and you really need the resource to do something else. So that is Daring Escape, very, very good. All right, moving on to Gutsy Move. This is a 2-cost event. Remove 2 threat from a scheme, remove 2 additional threat from the scheme for each face down encounter card in front of you. I love this card. This is one of my favorite cards in his signature selection of cards, and I'll tell you why. Because I almost always hit, I would say I pretty much always hit at least having 1 encounter card in front of me, because you can use Star-Lord's base ability. You can almost always count on there being 1 face down card in front of you. And at that stage, 4 threat removal for 2 is probably worth it's worth it. Like that is absolutely worth it. You can do that. You can feel good about it, and it can save you in a pinch when you have to remove some threat. But there are so many situations where you will hit 6 threat or even 8 threat because those situations do arise with Star-Lord's playstyle. And when you hit those amounts, it's ridiculous. So I love this card, and I almost always use it when it's in my hand, unless there's not a lot of threat on the scheme. Otherwise, I'm for sure using it. And it's not just the main scheme. You can use and do any schemes. There's not many limitations there. Gutsy Move is a great card, and I think that you'll get a lot of use out of it, again, unless you just don't have to deal with the threat because someone else is already dealing with it for you. All right, moving on to Sliding Shot. This is a 3-cost event. There's 3 copies of it. You can only play this if you control an element gun. Otherwise, it is a dead card in your hand. It's just a resource. Deal 5 damage to an enemy. Deal 2 additional damage to that enemy for each face down card encounter card in front of you. So Sliding Shot is completely reliant on whether you have an element gun in play. Now, if you played the element gun at the start of the game, you should absolutely have one in play, and you probably should play that element gun for this reason, because there are 3 copies of this. You're going to see it a lot, and not being able to play this because you don't have that card in play is such a disappointment, because this is such a powerful card, just like Gutsy Move, which we just looked at. You'll almost always hit 7 damage, so you'll have to do 7 damage for 3 pretty much every single time. As soon as you hit 9 and 11, it's insane. Like, you can do so much damage, and you get 3 of these, so you're going to do that constantly throughout the game. This is one of the most incentivized reasons to play that element gun at the start of the game. Unless you absolutely have something better you should be doing, I would really recommend you playing it, just so that every time you draw one of these, you're able to use it and take advantage of it, because it's just such a powerful attack card to do a huge chunk of damage to the villain, or to take out some of those, more powerful minions that are, it might be really pesky with 7 health or 5 health or whatever that you really need to take care of. There's a ton of flexibility here, and you'll always usually hit the high numbers as long as you're playing Star-Lord with the playstyle that he's meant to be played. All right, next we have Bad Boy. This is a 3-cost support. When you would take any amount of damage from the villain's attack, discard this card, prevent all of that damage, change to Alter Ego, and draw 2 cards. There's a lot going on here. So this does get discarded when you use it. So it's not, something that you're going to persistently use. This is a one-time thing until you get it back into your deck and you can play it again. That being said, you can wait until you're going to take a huge hit and then discard this, prevent that entire amount of damage, flip to Alter Ego, draw 2 cards, and be really set up for your next turn. Because you can easily flip back, but now that you're in Alter Ego form, potentially that facilitates some things that you wouldn't have been able to do because you would have remained in hero form. There's tons of potential here. The point here is you'll leave this in play for that right moment where there's an attack coming that you don't have the allies in play to block, where you don't have any other, you have low hit points already, potentially, or you just don't have a good way to deal with that incoming damage. This deals with it all and sets you up with 2 extra cards for your next turn, which is going to make for a very powerful turn for you. I love Bad Boy. It's a little bit steep at 3, and I don't mean steep as in like that's not the appropriate value for the card. It is. It's just, it is an expensive cost. However, again, Star-Lord can play it for free. So if this is your 3-cost card in your hand, there's nothing else you need to use that ability for, plop it down for free, and you cannot get any better than that. So very, very cool card. Leave it in play and be super happy when you use it. All right, we mentioned them a couple times already. This is Element Gun. There are 2 of these. They are restricted, a max of 2 restricted cards per player, so you can have both Element Guns in play. Exhaust Element Gun as a hero action and spend a resource of any type of your choice. Deal 3 damage to an enemy, and this attack gains piercing. This is a phenomenal card. Now, again, it's 3 damage. And if you look at it as just, hey, it's just 3 damage and I had to spend a card for it, is that worth it? Well, one resource for 3 damage, that's pretty good. It's the persistent nature of it, the fact that you can use this every single turn. And if you have both in play, that is 2 resources for 6 damage every single turn as long as they're in play, which unless something discards them, they will remain there. So that is ridiculous. And the fact that, normally with cards like this, you would say, if you get this out early. We have to rate this card in a couple different ways. If you get it out earlier, or if it doesn't come out till later. Element Gun, you'll always have 1 out early if you play it, because you always start the game with 1 in your hand. So that reliability improves it so much, because from the start of the game, if you use it every single turn, think about how many turns you're playing in the game. If you do 10 turns, that's 30 damage. Every turn, you're only having to use 1 resource to get there. So excellent card, and if you're lucky enough to get the second one out early too, you're golden. I mean, that 6 damage every turn with piercing is going to be so reliable and such a consistent damage dealing force that you're gonna be able to constantly chip away damage at the villain or take out minions, sometimes split 3 and 3. You're gonna be in great shape. So definitely try to play that first one, not only for having the ability here, but also because of sliding shot, and hopefully you get the second one and then you can just ride that roller coaster all the way to the win. All right, next up we have Jet Boots. Interesting card. So 2-cost upgrade. The first part of the ability says Star-Lord gains the aerial trait. Now, I'll come back to this. Normally I would say, oh, that's just a throwaway thing. We don't really have much use for aerial yet. That's all gonna change with Star-Lord. So next ability is Hero Interrupt. When Star-Lord would take any amount of damage, exhaust Jet Boots, prevent 1 of that damage for each face down encounter card in front of you. So I often had, going into the villain phase, at least 1, but usually 2 or 3 sometimes encounter cards in front of me. Being able to prevent 2 or 3 damage reliably every turn just by exhausting this is really, really good. So don't sleep on that ability. If you are playing Star-Lord to the playstyle he's meant to be played and reliably gain those encounter cards in front of you, preventing this damage consistently is a big deal, especially if you end up not playing him in leadership or you don't have the chump blockers and you're having to rely more on other ways to mitigate that damage. This will be a great way to do that. So coming back to the aerial trait. Aerial actually has some really strong uses in Star-Lord, and specifically because the additional player cards that we'll get to at the end all facilitate the aerial trait and are finally giving us more options to use the aerial trait rather than it just being this additional keyword that sometimes works in some heroes and sometimes is just a dead trait. So that actually is a bigger deal now that we have this pack in the game. So keep that in mind. This might be, besides its really great hero interrupt ability, this might be your way to get into the sky and be able to facilitate some other cards as well. All right, next up is Leader of the Guardians, 3-cost upgrade. Each Guardian character you control gets +1 thwart. So the power level of this card is going to be dependent on which aspect you're using to play Star-Lord, and not only that, but also how many allies you've included in your deck. If you're reliably getting a lot of allies out, especially if you're playing leadership, for instance, which is the way the aspect he starts with, this is going to have, you know, much higher power ceiling, because not only are you going to give +1 thwart to Star-Lord, you're going to have every ally in play have an additional thwart, which is going to add up and be very powerful, especially if you get this out early. If you don't have a lot of allies, 3 cost upgrade to just give +1 thwart to Star-Lord and the potential ally in the future might be worth it, might not. If you're playing it for free with Star-Lord's ability, I mean, you don't really have to think too much about it. It's a 0 cost that increases your thwart permanently. That's great. But again, a lot of this is going to rely on how many allies you have in your deck, how reliably you're getting them out, because as soon as you start hitting more than just Star-Lord with this, that's when the value really shoots up. And finally, we have Star-Lord's Helmet. This is a 1 cost upgrade. While you are in hero form, you get +1 hand size for each face down encounter card in front of you to a maximum of +3. At first, when I saw this, when I hadn't played Star-Lord yet, I thought, oh, okay, so, you know, you're getting +1 hand size. So essentially you're getting your alter ego hand size in hero form potentially consistently. That's decent, that's good. Like, I like the +1 hand size, it'll facilitate a lot of stuff. First of all, that is like the baseline. You'll pretty much always have +1 hand size. When I've had this out, I never once didn't have the +1 hand size. So that ended up being even more powerful than I was anticipating it to be, because having that extra card, that extra resource with Star-Lord is really, really good. That being said, the amount of times I actually hit the +3 hand size, the max, was a lot more than I thought. I often had an 8 card hand size with Star-Lord in hero form, and that was just bonkers. The amount of things I was able to do with Star-Lord on his turn was crazy because of how many cards I had in my hand reliably with this. This is a phenomenal card. Get this out early, play Star-Lord to his intended playstyle, go all in with some of these encounter cards, and get rewarded with a ridiculous hand size, so that even though you take a bunch of encounter cards and have to deal with a lot of stuff from the villain, you come back hard with a bunch of cards. So really, really good card. All right, kicking off the leadership cards, we got a bunch of allies here, which is really exciting. First off, Adam Warlock. So this is a 3 cost ally, 3 health, 1 thwart, 1 attack. After Adam Warlock attacks or thwarts, discard 1 card at random from your hand. If that card's printed resource has a fist, remove 3 threat. Lightning resource, heal 3 damage from an identity. The mind resource, deal 3 damage to an enemy, or a wild resource, you choose any of the above. So lots to unpack here. Obviously, Adam Warlock's base stats are pretty low for 3 cost. That being said, his ability is very strong. So every time he attacks or thwarts for either one, you're going to either get that boosted by an additional 3, or doing 3 to another enemy, or removing 3 from another scheme, or you're going to get to heal. The heal is the one situational one where if you're not in a situation where you need to heal, that one could end up being a dead draw for you, because you'd have nothing to heal. That essentially does nothing. That being said, 75% of the time you're going to get use out of this, again, unless the schemes also have no threat. You're generally going to get something out of it that is going to power up his 1 thwart, 1 attack to be something much more powerful and much more worth it. I will say discarding 1 card at random can be really bad. There are times where, yes, you discard the resource you want, but the card you discarded really completely screws up what you wanted to do on your turn. You can play stuff first and pretty much control what that is. So even though it says random, if you do everything on your turn first and leave 1 card in your hand that you don't care about, then use Adam Warlock to attack or thwart, you're essentially picking what you discard. So there's obviously easy ways to get around it. But again, depending on your situation, you could end up in a jam where you don't discard the thing you want. But I would say it's pretty easy to control as long as you plan your turn accordingly. Overall, I think Adam Warlock is a really solid card. I think that he gets a lot of value out of him, and there wasn't too many instances where I said, oh, I didn't get the result I wanted, this was not worth it. You have a couple of tries with him, and then he gets to, potentially be a blocker to soak up a hit as well. I had a lot of fun with playing Adam Warlock, and I thought I liked the randomness of it. Some people won't. Some people don't like Hulk, the ally, for the same reason, because of the unpredictability. At least here, all the results are positive. Some, I would say, like the heal is just potentially not as positive as others, although a free heal of 3 on your hero is a big deal. It prevents you from having to go to alter ego form. So if that's the situation you're in, you might be pulling for that one even. So very good card, and I had a lot of success with it. All right, Beta Ray Bill, 5 cost ally again, 4 health, 1 thwart, 3 attack. After Beta Ray Bill attacks or defeats a minion, remove 2 threat from the main scheme. So Obviously, this is way too expensive. I'm not saying way too expensive necessarily for what you get out of it, but way too expensive for a lot of people to want to play. This is an expensive ally. For 5 costs, you're essentially going to have to use your entire hand to play it. And if you're in, you know, a hero that only has a hand size of 5 and you didn't go to Alter Ego, you might not be able to play this at all. It might just be a card that you cannot play. So that makes it a lot worse. It's the ability is great and the potential in this card is great, but the cost is really bad. The reason it's not bad in Star-Lord is, again, because Star-Lord can play this for 2 essentially. And if you have that Power of Leadership card, essentially you're playing it for 1. You're playing the Power of Leadership card and Star-Lord's ability to make this the full 5 cost. So in Star-Lord, it's great. And getting that out for a really cheap cost like 2, and then having 4 chances to do 3 attack, which is essentially 12 damage, and each time removing 2 threat from a scheme, that's 12 damage and 8 threat from the main scheme. That is ridiculous. Like, that's insane. And that's why it's statted so high, because if it wasn't, that would be way too good of a hero. With 4 health as well, there's so much potential here. It's just the 5 cost that's really holding it back from most heroes, I would say. But again, there are ways to get cheat out heroes with other cards, with other heroes in the game, cheat out allies, I should say. So there's ways to get him out without having to pay the full 5 cost. That being said, if you're putting this in the deck thinking I'm gonna have to pay the full 5 cost, you're probably not gonna have a lot of success with it. You're probably gonna be disappointed by the performance. If you can find a way to, you know, circumvent that cost or make it cheaper, this is a really, really powerful ally. I had a lot of success with it in Star-Lord specifically. Every time this was in play, I was doing a whole ton of stuff. Hey guys, future Dylan here. I'm actually just editing the Star-Lord video as we speak, and I realized that I made a kind of a big mistake when I was talking about Yondu, and that's the fact that on his 1 attack, he actually does not take consequential damage. It's a pretty big oversight, and I thought about just like re-recording that section as if I never made that mistake, but then I would have had to get my clothes on that I was wearing that day and try to look the same, and it was just, someone would have called me out on it, and whatever. People make mistakes, I make mistakes, I've made them before, so I figured instead I would just jump in here and say that a lot of my thoughts still kind of remain the same for Yondu, but that being said, he does have way more value than I thought he did, because even though he's only doing 1 attack, it is infinite. So if you want to leave Yondu on the board and never block with them or have other allies to block, you can certainly do that, and you can just have Yondu completely be this guy who just keeps, you know, pegging off for 1 damage over and over and over again for the entire course of the scenario if you want, and with ranged obviously, so ignore and retaliate. So there is more value there to Yondu. The playstyle I play with and the way I use allies, I still would be probably in a situation at some point where I'd want to block with Yondu. I don't know how soon that would come in the scenario, whether or not he'd be worth it for the 4 cost. I do still think it's a little bit steep, but I will go back on what I said, and that, you know, I'm not quite as disappointed with Yondu having reinvestigated and played a game with him now. So I'll still leave, I'm gonna still cut to my original review so you can hear it all in its original format, but do note that I did make that mistake and I'm trying to correct it now. So let's jump right back. All right, next up, the last of these leadership allies is Yondu. So this is a 4 cost ally, 2 health, 2 thwart, 1 attack. The 1 attack has a star on it, which says Yondu's attacks gain range, which essentially ignores retaliates. So personally, I was not a fan of Yondu. At least in the games I've played, this was super underwhelming for me. I'm a huge fan of Yondu, the character, so I was a little disappointed by what we got out of Yondu here. This is a really expensive card for not really much payoff. It's situational. If you're playing a villain or you're in a situation where ignoring the retaliate is a really big deal, then great. Then you might end up getting a lot of use out of Yondu, especially if you buff him up with different attachments and things like that. However, 4 costs to be able to only have 2 health and do 1 attack twice, 4 costs for 2 damage, 4 costs for 4 thwart, like 4 costs for 1 damage and a block. Like, no matter how you slice it, there's way better options at cheaper costs to be able to do that. Like, there's no reason you need to be playing this card unless you specifically need to get over that retaliate desperately. Otherwise, I just found this to be really, really underwhelming. I'm not a fan of this card. Again, let me know if you found other uses that I may be ignoring. And again, I know you can buff up Yondu, and that's part of the point of playing leadership is you're buffing up some of these allies and making them more useful. If you have Yondu's attack higher and you're ignoring retaliate, that could be a big deal. But for me, it's just too expensive. I just never wanted to play Yondu unless I absolutely had to and I need an ally out to block, then I would. But I would have rather just have not included him in the deck and put a much cheaper ally in there if that's what I was looking for. So Yondu, not overly impressed, but again, we could see some potential if more need for ignoring retaliate comes up. Okay, so next we have Air Supremacy, 2-cost event. Choose up to X enemies, where X is equal to the number of aerial characters you control. Deal 3 damage to each chosen enemy. This has the potential to be wildly good, but again, it's going to rely on how much you have built your deck to accommodate aerial characters. So as I mentioned, we are getting more ways to gain aerial as well as more ways to capitalize off aerial. If you go that route, this card is really good. Even if you just have Star-Lord with his aerial trait and you have one ally in play that also has aerial, being able to do for 2 costs 3 damage to 2 enemies is really, really good. That's really worth it. I think you have to hit 2 reliably if you're going to be putting this in your deck. If you're not hitting that, you might be wanting to put in a different card. But again, it's a way to deal damage in leadership. It's a way to split that damage across different minions or the enemy and a minion. Lots of flexibility here, and it facilitates us building more aerial decks, which would be very interesting now that we're getting those support cards for aerial. There's been enough in heroes like even Wasp where there's an aerial trait but without much support around it. Then now we can potentially go back and build decks around it. That's what makes cards like this most exciting. Next up we have Blaze of Glory. This is a 2-cost event. You can only use max of these, one of these around. You can think of this as like your big final attack or of the round, or your big push. Each Guardian character gets +2 thwart and +2 attack this phase. At the end of the phase, deal 1 damage to each Guardian character. So this is your Guardian, big finisher move. I say finisher, it doesn't mean you have to win the scenario, but just like you're gonna do a whole bunch. If you have all your allies out in play, and maybe you have even more than 3 if you have cards like that we'll see coming up or other cards in the game that allow for more allies. Potentially you have 4 allies in play. If every single one of them has gained +2 thwart and +2 attack, you're gonna do a whole bunch of damage and a whole bunch of threat removal on this turn. So that's what this card is for. You save it and use it in those situations. However, if you're not set up for that situation, this card tends to be a little underwhelming. You have to really be going hard into having allies in play, playing leadership in that way, not having them all block right away and losing them, having a situation where you have a bunch and really capitalizing on it. If you have 1 in play, you're still getting decent value out of this, but because it does affect Star-Lord as well, obviously for 2, so believe me, it's still worth it to play with just Star-Lord and a single ally, but it goes way over the top as soon as you have 2 or 3 allies in play. So Blaze of Glory, very good card, and helps facilitate the Guardian archetype. All right, next up, Target Practice. This is a 0-cost support that says interrupt. When an ally with a weapon upgrade makes an attack, discard Target Practice. That ally gets +2 attack for that attack. So this is a really cheap way to get an attack boost on an ally. Yes, it has to have a weapon upgrade, but as we'll see coming up, there is a new weapon upgrade for leadership coming up after this. And with characters like Rocket introduced into the game and upcoming Agent Venom or just Venom, we're gonna have way more weapons in the game and more heroes that allow for using weapons and really capitalizing off of them. So this is a really exciting card for that reason. It's going to allow for leadership versions of some of these heroes, but even on its own, even this deck with the upcoming weapon card that I'll be talking about, being able to attach that very cheaply to an ally and then boost the attack by 2 for 0 cost is worth it. It's essentially 2 damage for 0, but again, depending on what the ally does, that might mean more if the attack gets boosted than just simply 2 extra damage. So it's a good card. I wouldn't say it's like phenomenal. It's not amazing. It's not a card that's an auto include, but if you're building a weapon focused deck or with a bunch of allies in leadership specifically, it's one you might want to consider including because it's going to be a really easy way to boost some of your attacks. And the final leadership card is, of course, the weapon I was alluding to, which is a 1-cost upgrade called Laser Blaster. Attached to a Guardian ally, max 1 per ally. Attached ally gets +1 attack, and its attacks gain overkill. So very cheap way to boost your Guardian allies. And again, with Star-Lord, all your allies are Guardians, which means you can boost any of them. They get an attack, they get an overkill added on, which the overkill could be a big deal if you're dealing with a lot of minions, especially cheap ones, to be able to still spill over that damage to the enemy, to the villain. And of course, we have Target Practice, which benefits off of Laser Blaster. So use in the base cards, I used Laser Blaster in conjunction with Target Practice a lot, and I saw a lot of success with that. Laser Blaster on its own is a pretty good card, and again, because it's a tech weapon, opportunities now to consider Rocket as a leadership hero with cards like this, and again with Agent Venom, or with Venom, I keep calling him Agent Venom, which I guess that technically is what he is. That'll facilitate some other options as well. More weapon cards is always good for the game when we have heroes that really benefit off weapons. So Laser Blaster is a pretty cool card, and I had a lot of success with it. So again, it's not uber powerful, but it's something that's welcome into the game and I had a lot of fun with. Okay, moving on to the basic cards, and we have another ally. I love talking about allies. 2-cost ally, 2 health, 1 thwart, 1 attack. Interrupt. When Cosmo attacks or thwarts, name a card type. then discard the top card of your deck. If that card is of the name type, Cosmo does not take consequential damage. So because you have the potential with Star-Lord in his alter ego form to switch one card from your hand to the top of your deck, Cosmo is really good in Star-Lord because you'll know what the top card of your deck is. You can absolutely hit this every single time that you have that information easily. You're discarding a card that potentially maybe you didn't want, that's why you wanted to switch it out of your hand, and Cosmo doesn't take the consequential damage. So that's pretty good for a 2-cost ally, makes him absolutely worth it. Beyond Star-Lord, if you don't have a way to predict what is going to be on top of your deck, if you're just taking the chance of naming card types, I don't know that Cosmo is overly worth it. It's a 2-cost ally. It's a cheap chump blocker, but he isn't always going to come with an ability then. If you can't reliably get that information, you can almost consider the text box blank, and it's just a 2-cost chump blocker. At that point, there's better, you take Ironheart and put her in the deck. Same stats, same cost, but you get the card draw guaranteed rather than potentially not getting the consequential damage. Plus, if you're using it just as a chump blocker, if you just want something to block a hit and have an ability off it, don't use Cosmo because you might as well get some value off that chump blocker by something that happens when you, like the triggers when you play it. Cosmo, nothing like that happens, and the consequential damage, who cares if you don't take the consequential damage if he was going to block next turn anyways. So situational, he's better in Star-Lord specifically, but again, it depends how you're playing your ally. If you want him to stay in play and just attack and thwart every turn, or attack or thwart every turn and never take a consequential damage, that's great. Then Cosmo is worth it and he'll just keep picking things off. But if you're ever going to block with him like right away, I don't know that Cosmo's worth it. So pretty cool card, though. I'm glad it's in the game. It just depends which hero you're playing it with. Next up, we have a support card, which is C.I.T.T. I don't know what that stands for. If anyone knows what that stands for, let me know. I'm not familiar with that. This is a 2-cost support. Exhaust C.I.T.T. and spend 2 resources of any type, ready a Guardian character. So again, the Guardian character can be Star-Lord. This is a reliable way, or Star-Lord or any of the Guardians we have. This is a reliable way to ready your hero for just 2 resources, which I say just 2 resources. That could mean losing 2 cards in your hand. Sometimes that will not be worth it at all. Other times you might have a really powerful hero that you want to facilitate getting another turn in. But again, this also works on allies. There's a lot of flexibility here in Guardian builds. It's going to allow for a lot of potential to be able to get multiple turns out of your allies or out of your hero to have more powerful turns. It's a pretty cool card. I'm glad it's in the game. But again, it's gonna find its home specifically in Guardian builds, or if you can build it around the fact that you really have a strong hero in play that you're buffing up and you want to have multiple base attacks or thwarts or whatever the case may be. Really cool card. All right, next we have Knowhere, which is another Guardian support card here, which is 2-cost support. Play only if your identity has the Guardian trait. Increase your ally limit by 1. Response after a player plays a Guardian ally, exhaust Knowhere, that player draws a card. So if you're playing a leadership deck like the one you get with Star-Lord and you're having a lot of Guardian allies, which again with Star-Lord, they're all Guardian allies, every time you play an ally, you're drawing a card by exhausting this. So as soon as you hit that I would say twice, it's already hit its value. Everything on top of that is just gravy, and then you're in a really good position to just get all these extra card draws. Increasing your ally limit is another big deal because we have ways to do that for Avengers specifically in the past in leadership decks, but we haven't had that yet for Guardians, which because they're so new, this is that card, and it's going to allow situations, because it's basic, for any hero to take on a leadership role and be able to reliably get 4 allies in play if you do a heavy ally focused deck. So very, very cool. I really like this card. I'm glad it's in the game, and I think it's really going to support the Guardian archetype, especially for leadership. And again, drawing the cards is just an extra added bonus, but a really good one if you hit it multiple times. Okay, last up on the basic cards is Pulse Grenade. So Pulse Grenade is a 2-cost upgrade. Hero action, discard Pulse Grenade and choose an enemy. Discard the top 2 cards of the encounter deck. Deal 1 damage to the chosen enemy for each boost icon discarded this way. So the ceiling here is obviously high. Obviously in a perfect situation, you draw into the perfect 2 cards with 3 boost icons, and you have 6 boost icons, and you do 6 damage and you only pay 2 for it. That's really good, and you can leave it in play and wait for the perfect opportune moment to do that. That didn't happen for me at all. And often, I was probably just unlucky. There was times where I only got a single damage off it. I was very unlucky, or I got 2 damage off it. I would say 2 or 3 was pretty reliably where I ended up. And for that, I just never saw enough value out of Pulse Grenade. It is it is worth it to say that you can have this card out and you don't, and like for a future turn where you're in a situation where you need some extra damage and you don't want to use resources from your cards, there is something to be said for that. But it was just too little damage for what I ended up having paid for it one turn to like set myself up for the future. I didn't feel like I was really getting ahead too much by having Pulse Grenade in play. There's potential there, and you might have, you know, outside of Star-Lord and other heroes, maybe like Scarlet Witch and things like that, you might have way more success with it. But I would just say in general as a card, I felt a little bit underwhelmed by Pulse Grenade. I thought it could have had, you know, a little bit more damage output and still been, you know, safe to put into the game, and I would have had more value out of it. Wasn't a huge fan, but again, I see the potential and you could have more success with it. Okay, moving on to the obligation quickly. This is Banishment. You can choose to either exhaust Peter Quill, remove Banishment from the game, obviously, or the second one is discard an element gun from play. If you cannot, place 3 threat on the main scheme and discard this. So losing an element gun, that really sucks. You should try to avoid that. I would do the first one before you ever do that. If you don't have an element gun in play for some reason, placing 3 threat on the main scheme to not have to exhaust your hero, not that big a deal. I like that option on there. It could have easily just been, you know, discard an element gun, and if you can't, maybe this card gains surge or something. I have no idea. The 3 threat is not overly bad. If you're in a tough pinch, just take the former instead of the latter. But overall, I like that they included that option, and I probably will do the threat option, you know, very often to not have to lose the ability to use Star-Lord for his base ability. So I like that they included that there. Overall, pretty cool obligation. All right, the Nemesis, Mr. Knife. I'm actually not familiar with Mr. Knife from the comics. I didn't read a lot of the Guardians comics. I was introduced to them from the movies, but seems like a really cool character. 2 scheme, 2 attack, 6 health, lots of health. Retaliate 1, the first treachery the engaged player reveals each villain phase gains surge. So this is a nasty card. It has a lot of health, decent damage and scheme output, retaliate on top of it as well. So like with that high health, you might not be able to kill it in one hit, which means you're going to take some retaliate damage on top of that. And the first treachery card that you reveal, the engaged player reveals, also surges into something else. This is one you really want to deal with quickly. It's really nasty, and it's kind of tough to deal with. Exactly what you would hope for out of a Nemesis. I think this is a great Nemesis, and one that's going to give you a lot of trouble, and they should. A Nemesis minion should give you a lot of trouble. They should feel really powerful. Mr. Knife does. I'm really, really happy with this one. Budding Crime Syndicate is next. It's a side scheme, very straightforward, not a lot to say here. Starts with 2 threat on it, but it also has hinder 2 threat per player added onto it. So when revealed, place an additional 2 threat per player in the game onto this card. It being in play means you have to draw an extra encounter card. Not a lot to say here. Drawing an extra encounter card sucks. There could be a lot of threat here. You're just gonna have to find a way to remove it. Overall, not super exciting. I like when side schemes have a bit more excitement to them. Gamora's was a lot more exciting and thematically fitting. This one is kind of boring, but again, it's something you're gonna want to deal with to not get that extra encounter card. And then 3 copies of the treachery Spartoi Cunning, I believe is how you pronounce it. When revealed, discard 1 card at random from your hand, take 1 damage, and place 1 threat on the main scheme. That's a lot of stuff. You're taking a damage, you're adding a threat, and you're discarding a card at random. It's not the worst treachery I've seen. Like there are worse ones in the game, so this isn't horrible, but there are 3 of them. You're gonna see them a lot. Discarding the card really sucks. Plus you get the added damage, which you might not be expecting and might put you in a jam, and the additional threat in the scheme. A lot of stuff is happening here. You want to avoid it, but again, it could have been worse, but there are 3 copies of them, so you're going to see it a lot. Okay, so let's talk about the new player cards, which, as I alluded to, it's all about aerial trait with these. Super excited. I'm really glad they went that route. So this is Dive Bomb. This is a 4-cost aggression event. It's really expensive. Play only if your identity has the aerial trait. Deal 7 damage to an enemy. Deal 1 damage to each other enemy. This is a very, very powerful card that is pretty expensive. So having a base aggression card that can do 7 damage and then an additional 1 damage to everything else is really, really good. Usually we see power level or damage output at that high in signature cards with heroes. The fact that this is an aggression aspect can go anywhere, really good. But again, you have to have the aerial trait. So without the aerial trait, you're not getting much use out of this. Because of the aerial trait condition, I kind of wish this would have been 3 costs. I understand why they didn't. It starts to compete with a lot of signature cards that are in hero decks. That's probably not what they wanted to do. It's just really pricey. Like if you're playing any of those heroes and you have options like Spider-Man or whatever the case may be, heroes I guess that have better aerial options, if you have those signature cards in your hand, you're gonna prefer to play those over Dive Bomb. And so are you really including Dive Bomb? Like, do you really need it? If you build an aerial deck, probably. Otherwise, why build an aerial deck or build a lot of stuff around aerial? But I still think it's good. I just well, it's for sure good. It's just expensive. I would have loved if it was 3 to really reward you for going after the aerial trait. I wish they had been more aggressive with some of these cards in terms of power level to resource ratio because of the aerial trait, and said we're going to give you a really powerful ability for not nearly as expensive because of the aerial trait. But I understand why they didn't. Still a good card, but I'm gonna have to play it a lot more to see just how worth it is at that cost of 4. Next up, Agile Flight. Again, play only if you have the aerial trait. Remove total of 5 threat from among schemes as you choose for 3. I really like this one. So I like this one better than Dive Bomb. So 5 threat for 3 is pretty good. Split among schemes as you choose is like an awesome addition to the card. And again, it facilitates aerial decks or decks that rely on aerial traits, or potentially you want to have that aerial trait and rely on it. It opens up deck building possibilities because of that, and it's just a really good condition. I'm excited to try this in a deck like Wasp, where she can already split things among multiple targets, and she has the ability to add an aerial trait with one of her signature cards. Now this rewards her for having that, and you're splitting that threat removal across schemes, and it's a pretty decent amount for 3 costs. So I prefer this to Dive Bomb. It's less flashy because Dive Bomb is just this huge attack, but I think Agile Flight will be more reliable. And finally, we have Ever Vigilant. This might be my favorite of all the new aerial cards that were introduced here. 2 costs, play only if your identity has the aerial trait, ready your hero, and remove 2 threat from the main scheme. So 2 threat for 2 isn't, anything to phone home about, but it's in protection, which is a big deal, and it gives you threat removal and protection, and it readies your hero in addition to that too. That makes it absolutely worth it. There's tons of heroes that can benefit from the extra ready and from the additional threat removal and protection. Again, I stressed before, I love when they include cards for the aspects that do things out of their archetype because it makes it easier for solo play. I think this is a great addition to protection. I'm a huge fan of protection, might be my favorite aspect. Having this card facilitates new things, it opens new opportunities, it adds threat removal to protection, and you're gonna be readying your hero, and you can start playing for some protection heroes that have aerial capabilities in them, like Iron Man, for instance. And have them be boosted by this as well and have way more options. So really excited about this. If I'm ranking them all, I think Ever Vigilant's my favorite of these aerial cards. I think the I'm gonna forget their names now. The Justice one was my second favorite, and then Dive Bomb was my third. But I think they're all good in their own right. But that's how I would rank them so far, having just barely scratched the surface with them. I'm excited to try them out more though. And that's it for Star-Lord. Okay, so what are my thoughts? I think Star-Lord is a very, very powerful new hero and a very cool addition to the game. So your enjoyment as a Star-Lord is going to depend on how much you like risk management. So Scarlet Witch had a lot of this too. If you played Scarlet Witch and you really didn't like that playstyle, if you thought that it was just like too chaotic and you didn't like having to take all these detriments just to be able to use her abilities, I would say Star-Lord's an improvement on Scarlet Witch. Like I wasn't a huge fan of Scarlet Witch, but I enjoyed her still. I enjoyed Star-Lord more than Scarlet Witch, but they do share a bit of a playstyle there. So keep that in mind. If you were absolutely not a fan of Scarlet Witch, you might not be a fan of Star-Lord. If you were though, and you like that risk management, you like having to take penalties to do way more powerful attacks and threat removal that other heroes can do in the game, you're gonna like Star-Lord. I think they could have even increased some of the power level of his cards to benefit, as a payoff for taking some of the encounter cards. But using the encounter cards as a new resource specifically for Star-Lord to facilitate a better hand size or more attack or whatever the case may be, or more threat removal, is really, really cool. It's a great addition to the game. It's super thematic in terms of taking the risk and being a risk taker and having it pay off and sometimes not pay off. Everything is there. It's a great recipe for success. I had a lot of fun with Star-Lord. I think it's one you should definitely check out. It's just going to depend whether or not you enjoy playing the game where you're going to feel like, man, I'm really causing a lot of headaches for myself just to be able to do this additional damage or this additional threat removal. Last thing I want to say is just his ability to play a 3-cost card for free, or remove 3 costs from a higher cost card. So powerful. Use that every turn if you can, as long as you have a 3-cost card or higher in your hand. It's absolutely worth it. You will benefit from having the encounter card in front of you from some of his other cards, and playing one of those cards for super cheap or for free is ridiculous, and it adds up to some crazy powerful turns for Star-Lord. So that is Star-Lord. Both these heroes came out on the same day. If you're wondering which one you should buy, if you're not looking to buy them both, if you only invest in a hero here or there, and you're wondering which one of these to pick up, Keep in mind, in the next couple days, I'm going to have a final video that compares Gamora and Star-Lord versus each other and which one I think you should buy. I'm not gonna say buy this one, I'm gonna say if this is your playstyle, do this. If this is how you enjoy the game, do this. I'll give you my final thoughts if I had only been able to pick one, which one I would have picked. So we'll have a video on that coming out really soon. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, consider subscribing to the channel, become a part of our community. We have a lot of Marvel Champions content coming out all the time, as well as a bunch of other board game content. And hey, Marvel Champions is great, but there's a lot of other really good board games out there that you should check out, and we have a bunch of videos covering them all the time. So hope you enjoyed the video. I hope that you got a lot of information out of it, and we'll see you in the next one.